The game of cricket has a long history rich in legends, heroes and champions. One of the greatest bowlers ever to grace the game was Sydney Barnes. His career spanned over 50 seasons and he was even asked to play for England at the age of 48. And yet he was renowned for being an incredibly difficult and dour personality. He was the first and perhaps ultimate cricket professional, a challenger of authority and the establishment. And not the least, he was a genius bowler feared throughout the world of cricket, whose innovative approach and dedication brought him records at every level of the game. In 1895, cricket was enjoying its golden era, producing a series of geniuses and personalities unparalleled in any other walk of life or popular pastime. W.G. Grace was enjoying an Indian summer with Worcestershire. K.S. Ranjit Singh of Sussex, the Prince of Batsmen, was at his peak. C.B. Fry, soon to be world long jump record holder, international footballer, rugby player and cricketer, was emerging as the ultimate sportsman of his time, and the mercurial Yorkshireman Wilfred Rhodes was entering his prime. The Australians, Clem Hill, Joe Darling, and the majestic Victor Trumper provided stern opposition for England's finest. Yet amongst these giants of cricket, S.F. Barnes was to make such an impression that nearly a century later he'd still be considered by many to be simply the greatest bowler the world has ever seen. Sydney Francis Barnes was born in Smethwick, Staffordshire on April 19, 1873, the second of 5 children. His parents were working folk of the Black Country, but Sid grew up in a rapidly developing world characterised by the decline of traditional manufacturing industries, the advent of the motor car, and seemingly constant global conflict. This seems the unlikeliest of backgrounds from which a cricketing giant should emerge, and yet Sid never forgot his roots or his family, for whom he would on occasion put his entire career at risk. His descendants live in Staffordshire today, and are surely the best place to start in attempting to discover the truth behind the legend of S.F. Barnes.
This is Penelope, and I'm Peter. We are the grandchildren of Sydney Barnes, the famous cricketer. And it was in very early years in life we realised how important Grandad was in the cricketing life, with people calling continuously. And as we grew up in life, we realised more and more the importance of who our grandfather was.
Sydney Barnes first started playing cricket when he was 18 years old. Now cricket at that time was growing immensely in popularity, and Barnes came from a family with no cricket background at all, which was very unusual at that point.
Daddy used to play a little, not much. I had 2 brothers, they never had a bat in their hand. The only coaching that ever I had was a fellow, when I was about 16, told me how to hold the ball for an off break. The others I taught myself.
Played his first match on this ground in 1894. That time Warwickshire had just become a first-class county, and he only played 4 matches from 1894 to 1896. But we're rather proud here at the fact that he played his first-class match for Warwickshire and on the Edgbaston ground.
Warwickshire competed in the county championship for the first time in 1895, but Barnes failed to make any significant impact and left the county after the close of the 1896 season.
They wanted one that was ready-made, and I know very well that I wasn't. I showed promise.
It appeared that at the age of 23 he'd missed his opportunity, but his talent was blossoming in the area of league cricket, as Barnes had signed as a professional for Rishton in the Lancashire League to play in between his all-too-occasional appearances for Warwickshire. In his first 2 seasons he took 156 wickets at an average of just 10.67. This standard was to be repeated through the following 44 seasons of professional cricket which Barnes played at every level of the game. So what was it about his bowling style which enabled him to take so many wickets over so many years?
Sydney Barnes was a cricketer who was an innovator. He was the first person to swing, seam and spin the ball. all at the same time at a pace which no other person ever tried, at a medium to fast. And Tiger Smith used to say he astounded people.
His arm action was close to his head, which gave him every advantage a bowler can wish for. He also had that which is necessary for any bowler to be a success, an immaculate length.
He was tall, 6 feet high, and with a very high action. He had all the attributes a bowler should have. He's a man with a very strong character. He fancied his chances against any batsman.
I once said to a batsman that we were playing against, when I delivered the ball, I want to be 8 feet. He said, by God, he said, you look 10 feet when you deliver the ball.
I've batted against him, also bowled to him as well. And he explained that he could bowl off spins and leg spins with precisely the same action. Said he got very big hands and he got very big long fingers, and he was able with his index and second finger to spin a ball from leg to off, and with the other 2 fingers he could spin the ball from the off to the leg. And he said the advantage of it is, as far as I'm concerned, that the batsman doesn't know what's coming.
Well, he seemed to me to have it all, this leg break and the off break. It was fast, he was tall, and made the ball, get up to unpleasant heights.
He was endlessly patient. I mean, for example, bowling this finger-spun leg break at quite a brisk pace and doing it for over after over, and then suddenly bowling the other one that came from off to leg and bowling somebody. Much to the surprise of the batsman, you can just imagine.
Not only could he swing the ball and cut the ball and bowl at great pace and bowl with a variation of pace, but in his 2 years at Lancashire and his years in the Lancashire League, he developed a ball that has been famously described as the Barnes ball. And this was a very fast leg break, swinging into the batsman and cutting away. And this ball, in conditions that suited his bowling, for example, on damp wickets, and of course wickets were uncovered at this time, this ball was practically unplayable.
And to bowl that ball, you've got to get direction and length. And I was always told straight balls never got wickets. So I always tried to do a little bit. The only time I was tired of bowling when I wasn't. I remember one match we were playing and Frank Woolley went to the captain. He said, for God's sake, put Barney on. He said, you're looking miserable, not bowling. Oh, it was nothing for me to bowl 3 to 4 hours.
Barnes' prowess with the ball was beginning to be taken seriously, and his services were required by Burnley, one of the Lancashire League's richest clubs, in 1900.
League cricket at that time was a very hard school. It was a school of, hard knocks. It was a school of hard-bitten professionals. It was hard-working men who had been used to working often down the pit, even in Lancashire and Staffordshire, also working in mills, coming and playing their cricket on a Saturday afternoon, literally just after they'd finished work.
Barnes topped 100 wickets in each of his 2 seasons for Burnley, and those incredible feats brought him sharply to the attention of Lancashire County Cricket Club.
They invited him down to Old Trafford for a trial, and he bowled at Hornby and McLaren, and they were very impressed by him, I think as anybody would be who faced SF Barnes. And after seeing him, they suggested he went into the second 11 to play a game in the second 11, but I think as the character of Barnes shows that he was not having that, and he was reputed to have said to Ian Hornby that he was better than at least 3 or 4 of the Lancashire first team. So it didn't go down too well with SF Barnes. And for a professional to speak to amateurs like that in those days was quite remarkable, and probably says something about the reason why Barnes never played much in terms of county cricket.
They wanted me to play with Lancashire, and I agreed to play with them. But from the time I went with them, it was always a question of LSD. I hadn't been with them long. We were playing Warwickshire, and word came down that I wasn't chosen for that particular match. So, of course, up I went to the committee room. I said, what game are you playing now? Well, we don't think it's your wicket. It had been raining, you know. Looked like being a sticky wicket. Well, that just shows how much you know about the game. I said, the first time that I've ever heard that a man who can spin the ball can't bowl on a sticky wicket. I said, still, as it's all right with me. If you're going to rest me, you can rest me all the season if you like. That is, if you're going to pay me. But if you're not paying me, I finish with you now, straight away. But anyway, they didn't leave me out again.
In only his third game for the county, Barnes produced a performance of 6 for 70 in the final game of the 1901 season against Leicestershire at Old Trafford. A performance so impressive that it persuaded Lancashire and England captain A.C. McLaren to include Barnes in his touring party to visit Australia on a mission to regain the Ashes.
Now, the only reason he was chosen by Archie McLaren, because there was a shortage of bowlers to go on that tour. Lord Hawke, who was the chairman of England selectors, the autocrat at Yorkshire County Cricket Club, decided that because of the efforts of Wilfred Rhodes and George Hurst during the 1901 season, when Yorkshire marched to the county championship title, that they deserved a rest during the winter. And McLaren, being short of bowling talent, decided, on the evidence of that game against Leicestershire, on the evidence of seeing Barnes in the nets and his performances in the Lancashire League, that he would be the type of bowler suitable for the conditions in Australia.
Barnes' pugnacious personality was fast becoming as feared as his bowling. Indeed, one of the most famous anecdotes about him concerns the 2-month-long journey aboard the SS Omra. Crossing the Bay of Biscay, a storm lashed the boat. Archie McLaren, the captain, and one of the few members of the party to have been out of the country before, let alone on board a ship, put his team's mind at rest with the immortal line,
"Don't worry. If we go down, at least that bugger Barnes will go down with us."
Barnes took Australia by storm. As McLaren had predicted, his style of bowling was perfectly suited to the hard Australian wickets, giving him an extra zip off the pitch and allowing him to dominate the Australian batting.
They just couldn't get over him. They didn't know what to do with him. They didn't know how to play him, because suddenly the ball would swing in from the off stump to the middle, and then it would pitch and leave them, spinning. Nobody could understand how he did it.
In those first 2 test matches, he took 19 wickets. He took 5 wickets in an innings in his very first test match. He took 13 wickets at Melbourne in his second test match, which was an England record at that time. And then went to Adelaide and unfortunately had a knee injury, which not only curtailed his tour there, but also affected his first season in county cricket in 1902.
Barnes returned triumphant even if England didn't. After his departure from the Adelaide field, when his knee broke down under the stress of bowling so many overs, the team succumbed, losing the final 3 tests to slump to a convincing 4-1 series defeat. Barnes was recognised as one of the most dangerous and devastating bowlers in the world after just 2 full test matches, and the summer of 1902 seemed to be set fair for further Herculean feats of bowling wizardry.
In those days, the wickets were very poor, and the bowlers had the upper hand a great deal. The batsmen, a few averaged 30 runs in a season in those days. You were a very good batsman. And so the bowlers had the upper hand for a while, actually.
It was also a period as well when you had of course, the amateur and professional, which is unknown today. And this is perhaps the area in which Barnes is to be remembered, because he was such as the archetype professional. He was the cricketer who saw cricket as his craft and wasn't going to see cricket devalued. And for that we should thank him, really, although he did take it to extremes at times.
Australian crowd were booing him as it was taking him too long to set his field, and he played up to him. It took him longer and longer, you know. That was Barnes, you see. All right, I'll make the so-and-so's wait. And they were booing him because he was taking too long to set his field.
Half a century later, John Hartley of the Times would recall how
Australian mothers frighten naughty children with the name of Sidney Barnes.
This image of almost ogre-like ferocity is one compounded by other examples of his sometimes petulant behaviour.
If anybody set a field which Barnes didn't like, he used to start lobbing full tosses, and in order to show just that the captain's field was not as he wanted it, and he wasn't afraid to do that.
When I was bowling, I was captain, and that's a funny thing to say. McLaren said he was the easiest man that ever I had to captain. So I simply tossed him the ball. He placed the field as he liked and bowled as he liked. That was a compliment.
Against this backdrop, Barnes took the field for Lancashire in the County Championship of 1902, taking 95 wickets at an average of 21.56. But the daily grind of county cricket seemed not to be to his liking. Barnes was paid the same money to bowl more than 800 overs as for bowling under half that total for Burnley.
The bowler was really just regarded as somebody who you could call on from one end and throw down 6 balls, and that was it. People came to see the batsman. People came to see, and often what used to happen was that with the amateurs and professionals, was that you could actually have in a team, even a county team, and actually even in a test team, players of inferior quality merely because they were amateurs, merely because they were not supposedly paid for playing the game. And I think that did rankle with Barnes, that you were not picking things like the best team, you were just picking a team because of somebody's status. And Barnes was always conscious of his own status and his own working class background, and the fact that he played cricket as you would approach a job.
Playing for his country was a different matter, and Barnes was always keen to serve. Though at this time the selection process was not always one conducive to necessarily picking the best team, as events surrounding the first test of the summer against the touring Australians proved.
From 1899 up until 1909, there was an incredible conflict between Lancashire and Yorkshire. I mean, we've all heard of the War of the Roses. Well, Lancashire were led by Archie McLaren, who was the captain of England, and Yorkshire were led by the chairman of the England selectors, Lord Hawke. And their conflict not only led to Sidney Barnes's selection for England, but also his deselection for England as well. At Sheffield, he wasn't part of the original chosen party, but when McLaren arrived there and saw the conditions, the heavy cloud cover, he thought, who do I know that can swing and cut the ball better than anyone in the country? And he cabled Sidney Barnes to turn up. Barnes came there, replaced Schofield Haig, another Yorkshireman, and the crowd, obviously in Sheffield, Yorkshire partisan crowd, were very upset about this, but within a few balls, Barnes started taking wickets, and he really got the crowd behind him. But of course, England suffered a disastrous loss. Barnes' knee still wasn't healed up, and he didn't play in the rest of that test series.
Without the injured Barnes, England lost the Ashes 2-1. His disillusionment with playing county cricket was also plain. He was noted for not being prepared to bow his knee and touch his forelock to the gentlemen amateur players, and this made him unpopular with his fellow professionals, who considered Barnes' negotiation of better contracts as discourteous to say the least.
He regarded cricket like you would regard any other job. Like if you were working in a factory, you would work from 9 till 5. You wouldn't work from 9 till 5:05. And he regarded cricket in a very, very similar light, which a lot of people found a bit unusual.
Sidney Barnes would have been quite at home in the present environment because he thought it was a great honour to play for England, but he also felt that he should have some money in his pocket as well. And this was his own, what he thought about life and thought about cricket. Why should he play 6 days a week when he could play for a league, or a Lancashire league or Staffordshire league, and get the same amount of money or more by just working 2 or 3 days a week and playing on the Saturday? And of course he would have been at home because he was the first man to have a manager and a publicist. And the name of that manager and the name of that publicist was Sidney Barnes.
He was very much the enigma of the time and very much a product of his time. Don't forget, when Barnes first appeared in county cricket and on the international scene, 1901, 2, 3, the nascent Independent Labour Party was just gaining votes, gaining a foothold in society in England. James Kerr Hardy, of course, was around at this time. Emily Pankhurst forming the Women's Social and Political Union. Barnes, in his own way, was a working class hero of that time. Just as in the football world, there was Billy Meredith playing for Manchester City and Manchester United, a great bribe scandal at the time. Barnes, in his own way, was asserting the values of the working class person in the sporting world, in a world that previously had been the preserve of the gentleman amateur.
Even at Lancashire, just to say this, that an actual member of the club could come down to have nets and summon one of the bowlers to bowl at him. Now, you know, you could have an England bowler there bowling at a member in the nets. For what reason? Because, you know, he was regarded as little more than a servant, and so that's the background you actually see Barnes in.
And so you still didn't get over this class distinction. Let's be honest about it, this class distinction. And of course, when you've got a man like Sidney Barnes, who actually had a mind and wished to use it and wished to better himself, they can understand it. Never mind, accept it.
In a lot of cases, a lot of these gentlemen were amateurs. For example, Archie McLaren at Old Trafford was the assistant treasurer and was paid as much, if not more, than most of the professional players. W.G. Grace, the greatest amateur of them all. Now, Barnes grew up during these, I know it's the end of Grace's career, but Archie McLaren was his captain at Lancashire, and he saw this all through the country, that these supposed gentlemen were being paid to play, and he couldn't see why this wasn't just out in the open, why there was this differentiation between gentlemen and players.
Cricket perhaps could have moved faster in the age when Barnes played if more players had been like Barnes and actually stood up for what they believed in and also the gifts that they had. And the sadness is that cricket, certainly Test and county cricket, could actually lose somebody like Barnes so quickly when he was so great.
I went up to the committee room one day. I said, you can keep your winter pay. I'll work for it so that I've got something to look forward to when I finish cricket. And their reply was, oh, we can't be bothered finding your work. I said, all right. I said, it's up to me then. And that was the end of Lancashire.
Sidney Barnes married and started a family immediately, and he decided that the best method of securing their future was a return to league cricket. Thus the 1903 season was his last on the county circuit, despite bowling in excess of 1,000 overs and taking 131 wickets at 17.85, helping Lancashire to 4th place in the county championship in the process.
At the end of that 1903 season, because Barnes was no longer contracted to Lancashire, because he decided to go back to league cricket, he was ignored by the test selectors.
Barnes left Lancashire amidst a storm of publicity, with Wisden describing his move to the Church Club as a
defection,
and the county's minutes recording that they were
finally disposing of Barnes.
In his 2 seasons at Church, he bowled a total of only 591 overs, and yet took 154 wickets at just 9.42 apiece. He quite simply terrorised the opposition.
I like the stories of, you know, the sort of opposing captains saying, you know, saying to number 7 batsman, pad up, you know, right at the very beginning of the innings. And number 7 saying, well, you know, why should I pad up? I'm number 7. You'll be needed quickly. And sure enough, you know, after half an hour, the number 7 was in, because Barnes had taken 5 wickets. Marvellous.
For the 1906 season, Barnes returned home to North Staffordshire, where he played in the league for Port Hill Park in Stoke-on-Trent.
Well, at that time, I suppose in 1906, he must have been one of the finest professionals in the league. And he must have got a load of wickets in that time. And this is just one instance of it, where he went all through the league innings, you see. The match was played between Port Hill and Leigh Highfield on the 18th of August 1906, in which S.F. Barnes, Port Hill professional, batted all through the Port Hill innings, going in first, and then took all 10 Leek Highfield wickets. In other words, Leek Highfield were out for 37, Port Hill 136. He must have done other things, but he was an exceptional bowler compared with the other league bowlers at the time, you see. But that's probably one of the most exceptional, I suppose, really, to get all 10 wickets and get the highest score in the Port Hill innings, you see.
Port Hill became the preeminent team in the league, with Barnes taking 100 wickets in a season 6 times at an incredible average of just 5.28 in his 9 years at the club. Somewhat ironically, at the same time, he was also making waves playing for Staffordshire in the Minor Counties Championship.
Staffordshire had not really had a great deal of success as minor county cricketers until the name Sidney Barnes was associated, and that changed Staffordshire's impact as well, because his performances with the ball meant that Staffordshire started becoming quite a good side, and very, very early on he actually was main instigator and then winning the Minor Counties Championship, I think 3 years in succession.
He realised he was a good cricketer, and you couldn't take that away from him, could you? Now, he scored centuries for Staffordshire, you know, with the bat. Besides the 1,400 wickets, he scored quite a few centuries for Staffordshire.
If I'd been out for records, I could have made a lot more runs.
And for most of his time when he played for Port Hill, he actually was playing for either England or the MCC. For a club cricketer or a league cricketer to play for his club and then to go off in the summer and play for England, or maybe that winter go and tour South Africa or Australia, it's unbelievable.
People could not understand him. People couldn't work him out. They could neither work him out on the cricket field in terms of how he bowled to you, or how he would react in terms of whether he would want to play, and that's strange. He wasn't predictable in any shape or form. I think there is a sense in which he was predictable to his family, and I think he's kept his family life very much, very much to himself. But certainly that sense of enigma, nobody could work him out.
Barnes' incredible career with Staffordshire saw him take 870 wickets at 7.83 in the 10 seasons preceding World War I. Here was a top Test player operating in minor counties cricket, yet these figures are phenomenal. His batting also improved, and he'd often go in as high as number 3 for the county and open the innings for Port Hill. These performances proved to be irresistible to the Test selectors, who resurrected Barnes' career at the highest level by selecting him to tour Australia in 1907-08.
A lot of the regular county bowlers decided that they weren't going to go on that tour. In 1907-08 in Australia, he took 20-odd wickets, established his reputation firmly in Australia.
But it was with the bat and not the ball that Barnes' most memorable contribution to the series was made. Having lost the first Test, Barnes bowled England into a winning position at Melbourne with 5 for 72 in the Australian second innings, leaving a target of 282 to win. Disaster loomed at 198 for 7 when Barnes entered the fray. But he went on to score 38 not out and guided England to victory with a last-wicket partnership of 39 with Arthur Fielder. Barnes struck the winning run amid scenes of great English jubilation. Sadly, this was the high point of the tour, as England were soundly beaten 4-1. Barnes, aged 35, contributed 24 wickets to pass 50 in just 9 Tests.
In the 1909 season, he played 3 Test matches in England against Australia. Again, he took 19 wickets in those 3 Test matches. He wasn't selected for the first 2 games. Everyone wondered why, because by this time he was widely regarded as one of the best bowlers in the world.
When he actually played for England or the MCC, I think his performances were fresher. He didn't actually have the burden of travelling around the country day in, day out, playing county cricket. And I think that actually helped him greatly with his performances on the international scene.
By the end of the 1909 series, despite the fact that he played in league cricket, despite the fact that he was only a minor counties cricketer, he became an England regular. And by 1911, between December 1911 and January 1914, he created records that bowlers these days can only dream about.
Barnes was named as one of the 5 Wisden Cricketers of the Year in 1910, but it was the 1911-12 tour of Australia which saw the start of his greatest run of wicket-taking.
Opening the bowling with the Warwickshire captain Frank Foster, the pair took 70 wickets in that Test series and completely destroyed the cream of Australian batsmen. And don't forget, at this time, Australia's team included such fantastic greats as Victor Trumper, Clem Hill, Sid Gregory, some of the greatest names in batsmanship in Australian cricket history, and Sydney Barnes steamrolled through them in that tour.
England lost the first Test in Sydney by 146 runs. But the series was turned on its head by one of the most devastating spells of opening bowling in Test history, but it almost never happened.
He was very sick the night before the Test, and little Sid Gregory, the Australian, he was little, he was 5'2" or 3, came up to him and said, "Oh, I'll help you, Sid." He said, "I'll bring a bottle up," and he brought a bottle of whiskey and found some extra blankets, and Sid had a very uncomfortable night, but the whiskey and the sweating out did the job. He wasn't feeling quite himself the next day, but he took 5 for 6, 5 top Australian batsmen, just wiped the Australian 11 away.
The first one was Warren Bardsley. I bowled to him, and one that swung into him, and it hit his toe and then onto the wicket. Galloway, he was number 2, I believe. He was letting the ball go by, which appeared to be about a foot outside his legs. Suddenly it dipped into him, and he was LBW. Clem Hill. I bowled one exactly the same to him. He played it, and I bowled one that pitched on his leg stick, which was an off-spinner. He paid me a compliment. He said he'd never had such an over in his life. Warwick Armstrong, he was a right-hand batsman. I forget now how many I bowled at him, but one pitched on his leg stick. Tiger Smith caught him behind the wicket.
That didn't remain there. Sid kept them quietly for about an hour and 20 minutes. And if I remember rightly, his score or analysis was 4 wickets for about 1 run, and then 5 for about 6 runs.
Barnes had decimated Australia's batting and proceeded to demolish it again in the final 3 Tests, each won by England with room to spare. His feats inspired a nation which had been shaken to its roots by the sinking of the unsinkable Titanic, and the failure and subsequent death of Captain Scott in the Antarctic. The regaining of the Ashes in such style raised the spirits of the country, and Sydney Barnes was now viewed without question as the world's greatest bowler.
The bowler who is great under all conditions is naturally a rara avis. Such a bowler was Barnes, who could bowl on any type of wicket against the highest class of batsmen with astonishing success. Indeed, it has always been my opinion that, relatively speaking, he showed greater genius when conditions were favourable to run-getting and when the ball came faster off the pitch than when everything was in favour of the bowler.
But Barnes was by no means finished there. The summer of 1912 saw an experimental triangular Test tournament with both the Australians and the South Africans visiting. Barnes took 34 South African wickets in the 3 Tests at a miserly average of 8.29. He also clinched the tournament for England by taking 5 for 30 and skittling Australia for 111 at the Oval. In the process, he set a new England Test record of 140 wickets and took his 106th Australian victim, also a record. Approaching his 41st birthday, Barnes set sail for South Africa with the England touring party. He was at the height of his powers.
And in that series, in just 4 Test matches, he's created a record for the number of wickets in a Test series, which will probably never be beaten. He took 49 wickets. Imagine that, 49 wickets in four games, an average of over 12 wickets per Test match. In one match at Johannesburg, he created the record for the number of wickets in a game, 17 against South Africa at Johannesburg, which has only been beaten in cricket history once, and that by Jim Laker at Old Trafford in 1956.
He beat the bat sometimes 4 or 5 times and over without getting a wicket.
But the 49 he did take came as a result of his effectiveness on the matting wickets in South Africa. Barnes generated extra pace off the pitch to bamboozle the South Africans into submission. The only resistance came from Herbie Taylor, who had the audacity to score a century for Natal in one of the tour games, forcing Barnes to skulk off to long leg, mumbling,
"It's Taylor, 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 all the time."
He took 14 wickets in the drawn fourth game to bring his career record to 189 in just 27 tests at an average of 16.43. But he refused to appear in the fifth and final match.
He had a contractual disagreement, I think we'll put it at that, for the final test match. I believe that he wanted to bring his family over from England, and the organising committee wouldn't pay for it. So I think, I wouldn't say he went on strike, but there was certainly some disagreement.
Barnes was at the peak of his powers. He had 189 test wickets. He had a fabulous strike rate. His average was just 16.43. He was obviously going to go on to bigger and better things. He was at the peak of his powers, even though he was 41 years old, and then the war intervened.
Unwittingly, Barnes had ended his test career at the age of 40 as storm clouds brewed over Europe. Too old to be called up, though not too old to play cricket, Barnes scoured the country for somewhere to play.
Because of the attitude towards the war, organised sport, it was decided to cancel for the duration of the war. Now, the one league that didn't cancel was the Bradford League. And Barnes, at the beginning of the 1915 season, was looking through a copy of Athletic News and saw an advert. Left-arm spin bowler wanted. Barnes cabled the club, which was Saltaire in the Bradford League, saying, you know, will I do? And there was a straightforward cable back saying, yes, of course, come at once, like, start on Saturday. And that started an association with the Bradford League and with Saltaire that lasted until 1923. And during that time, he created records in the Bradford League that were second to none. But what you've got to remember is his average during most seasons there was under 5 runs per wicket. And during the war years, most teams in the Bradford League, with it being the only league where cricket was being played, had 2 or 3 first-class professionals playing. For example, Jack Hobbs was playing at one club, Schofield Haig at another. And because of that, the standard of cricket was very high in that league, but Barnes strode like a colossus during that time.
The war had taken a terrible toll on the nation's young men, and English cricket suffered greatly as a result. 8 consecutive test defeats against the Australians followed the end of the war as England fielded under-strength teams.
When Test cricket re-emerged after the First World War, he was actually still in the frame for selection for the next tour to Australia. Straight after the end of the First World War, he'd have been some in the region of 46, 47, but he was still obviously still pretty fit and still taking wickets.
But because the England selectors wouldn't allow him to take his wife and child to Australia for the 1920-21 season, he decided not to go. And one can see that if he'd have been selected between 1902 and 1909 more regularly, if he'd have been selected after the First World War, then he would surely have created a record for the number of wickets in a Test career that it'd have been even difficult to beat nowadays.
In 1924, after a break of 10 years, Barnes resumed playing cricket for Staffordshire, inspiring them to a further minor counties championship and recording post-war figures of 571 wickets at a mere 8.65 apiece.
And his Staffordshire career lasted right up till 1935, when he was, of course, 62 years old. Imagine that, 62 years old, opening the bowling for Staffordshire. What a fabulous performance.
Tales of Barnes' exploits in both league and minor counties arenas are legendary. Some are apocryphal, others possibly exaggerated in the handing down from generation to generation. All are worth hearing.
Staffordshire were playing Surrey, and on one of the evenings, Stanley Heath said, come on boys, let's go down to, I think the shop, the bar or whatever it was called Scott's in the Strand, where they had Guinness and oysters. And so Heath said he was going down there, and Barnes said, well, I'll come along, we'll come along. And the chap that went with him was called Sedgwick, who played for Walsall in the Birmingham League and also for Knipersley. And these two went with Stanley, and they had their Guinness and their oysters. And when he came to pay the bill, suddenly Sedgwick and Barnes disappeared.
One of the most famous stories revolves around Bernard Hollowood, Staffordshire cricketer and editor of Punch magazine, fielding at the end of a long, hot summer's day.
The last ball of the day, Staffordshire versus Denbighshire. The batsman wanted to hold out for the last ball. Barnes wanted to take a wicket. Hollywood was fielding at silly mid-off. Barnes came up to bowl. He stopped just before he was bowling, pointed to Hollywood, shook his finger to point for him to move a couple of yards. Bernard Hollywood thought, well, a couple of yards, I'll just move here, like it's the last ball of the day, what does it matter? Barnes went back to his run-up, came up to bowl, he was just in his delivery stride, then he stopped. With a face like thunder, Barnes walked down the wicket, grabbed hold of Hollywood and moved him a yard into his position for this last ball, and the crowd were laughing, and Hollywood, was sort of embarrassed, and Hollywood said he turned to the batsman, he saw the batsman shaking with fear, and Barnes came into bowl, bowled that last ball, and plop, gently from the batsman straight into Hollywood's hands, the ball came. That story epitomises what Barnes was like.
But it's a tale which has a variety of endings.
There was a chap called Aaron Lockett, who used to play for Bignell End, who always teased Barney about this. And I remember on one occasion, Barnes, playing in a county match, placed Aaron Lockett very accurately in the slips. And he bowled the ball to the batsman, and the ball came straight to Aaron Lockett, who put it down. And when the ball came back to Barnes, he was so cross, he went like that and threw the ball down.
Barnes was, I think, a rather forbidding figure. He got this I mean, if you read about cricket at all, you'll see that people say he got the evil eye. He had this ability to look at people.
This legendary ability was celebrated by Bernard Hollywood in this cartoon entitled A&. Other LBW Barnes Naught. And it must have terrified most batsmen in the leagues in which Barnes played.
Joe Hankers used to be the village blacksmith striker at the colliery at Silverdale, and my late grandfather was the blacksmith, so I had a lot to do with Joe Hankers as a young boy. And I used to ask him about S.F. Barnes, and he said he was one of the best bowlers he's had ever batted against. And Joe Hankers told me he had the pleasure hitting S.F. Barnes for three fours in one over, but on the last ball of the over, he bowled Joe Hankers. And Joe says he was a tall fella, S.F. Barnes, and Joe said he just stood and looked at me as I walked past him.
Barnes nearly always won in the end. In 1932, the touring Indian team visited Stoke to play Staffordshire. Barnes took 5 wickets for 85 in a drawn game, displaying all his old fire and guile. Even at nearly 60 years of age, Barnes played to win, a virtue recalled by cricket broadcaster John Arlott.
Still, batsmen feared him. Still, at an age when he could draw the old age pension, there was this tall, upright man, bowling, and still, though not at his old great pace, still from time to time making the ball snarl up off the pitch against the fingers, still bowling that old leg break and the off cutter, still bowling an immaculate length, still bowling them out.
And I'm sure, like all great bowlers, he got a lot of wickets. Spofford before him was a great case. By sheer snarl, the reputation got him wickets. And good luck to him if batsmen are fool enough and weak enough to fall for that sort of thing. But I'm sure as he took his cap off and gave it to the umpire that his reputation was already chalking up a few wickets.
His obsessively competitive nature stayed with him as he continued to decimate opposing batting lineups in the Lancashire leagues. John Arlott recalls another story.
2 tail-end batsmen were nicking and edging him everywhere except where they were aiming, and he stumped off at the end of an over with the words, "They're not batting well enough to get out."
Between 1924 and 1933, Barnes averaged over 106 wickets per season at an unbelievable average of 6.8 in league cricket. As he wound down his career with hometown club Smethwick, his average was still under 10 in taking 113 wickets over 2 seasons at the ripe old age of 63. His career record in the league reads 4,069 wickets at 6.08, and with Staffordshire a further 1,441 victims costing 8.15 apiece. Phenomenal bowling.
The greatest bowler of them all, as many pundits might agree, a stern-faced titan with the ball, whose like we never more may see. So accomplished at his noble art, with fierce spin and deviations, he tore illustrious sides apart, laying bare their limitations.
I actually feel still today that his records and his impact on cricket in Staffordshire and the wider area of world cricket is really still not really understood.
With a further 530 first-class wickets to add to his record 189 test victims, Barnes' career record surely is second to none. There's no doubt either about his determination not to be outdone by rival batsmen, whatever the occasion.
Sidney Barnes playing against Constantine in a charity match on a ground near Oldham. Barnes was bowling. He got him caught at the wicket in his first over, and the umpire gave him not out. So at the end of the over, Barnes said to the umpire, he says, he hit that, didn't he? He says, oh yes, he hit it all right, he says, but the spectators want to see Constantine bat a bit. Well, he says, you better give me my sweater. He says, let somebody else bowl. I've got a reputation as well as Constantine.
He was asked to appear by a local builder when he was in North Wales in a charity match, and Barnes's reply to the builder goes, I'll appear in your match if you build me a house. And of course he never appeared in that match.
Such dogged defence of cricket as his profession, and thus his means of supporting his family, characterised Barnes' whole career. But the passing of time was catching up even with the master bowler himself. Although his penultimate season with Bridgnorth saw him take 126 wickets at 6.94, years of pounding up to the wicket for over after over finally took its toll.
Professional career finished close to his 70th birthday, playing in the North Staffs League for Stone Cricket Club, and had a very good start of the season, but I think possibly his age and the increasing years meant he didn't finish that season. He actually continued coaching and coached for various clubs and played a little bit of cricket, but finished his career around about mid-40s, 1940s, which meant he's well into his 70s when he actually finished playing cricket full-time.
Well, truthfully speaking, I wasn't getting the nip out of the wicket at the finish that I used to do. But I'd always got a good length, which made them have to watch me.
His illustrious career over, Barnes didn't rest on his laurels. He continued his coaching, although predictably it seems he had less than the right amount of patience to deal with young cricketing hopefuls.
I was told by my father that he wasn't the greatest person to get on with. He didn't actually pass on a lot of help to youngsters. He kept himself to himself, and he wasn't a coach as such. You know, if youngsters sort of asked him questions on, you know, how to do that, he didn't do anything. He just sort of kept himself to himself and said, you know, nothing.
Well, he was strict. He was always strict. He used to take me to school. I used to go to school with him on the bus when he used to go to the office. And then I used to meet him at night time. He used to come back. You've got to do as you're told, but he got his soft points, but it made it better for us when we got older. But he was stern with people if he did, you know, people he didn't know. He was stern until you got to know him.
I'm a Yorkshireman. I was born in a house overlooking Headingley Cricket Ground in Kirkstall Lane, and I knew a lot of the contemporaries who played with them very, very well. And so I got on very well with him, and I found him a very hospitable and a very nice person to talk to, even though he had a reputation otherwise.
When you were little, if he wasn't going anywhere, he used to teach you for bowling, and he used to teach you for batting as well. You both got to play with him. And we were both like that, and he used to have Peter in as well, and if you didn't get it right and you didn't get the ball right, that was it, and you got told off.
I learned at a very early age yet again that at first light in the morning, with 6 inches of freezing cold water in the bath, liberally splashed about and rubbed down with a towel after quite vigorously, did you the world of good. And bearing in mind his age and his stance, I don't think Grandad had any complaints in that respect, and certainly I followed suit in that bath on many occasions.
Attending the Diamond Jubilee dinner of the North Staffordshire and District League, Barnes' legendary coarse wit was once again seen to its full and rather devastating effect.
I said to him, how many times have you played cricket for England, Mr. Barnes?
And he got a very gruff voice, you know, and he said, "Not enough."
But his was also a visible presence at both Staffordshire county games and test matches.
He was often seen attending test matches at Lord's, at other grounds, Trent Bridge for example, with Wilfred Rhodes by his side throughout the 1950s and 1960s. And of course Wilfred Rhodes eventually went blind, and it was Sidney Barnes who used to lead him to the frontier of the pavilion there at Lord's. And there's a sort of very famous writings from many people about the two of them together there, both great England cricketers, sort of complaining about it's not as good now as it was in the old days. And he was a very, very well-respected figure in the world of cricket in the 1950s and 1960s, unlike his position, of course, at the turn of the century.
One of the greatest honours the cricketing establishment can bestow was accorded to Sidney Barnes in these later, more harmonious years. His portrait, donated by Staffordshire, was hung in the long room at Lord's. It rightfully hangs there still, keeping a watchful eye over the bowlers of today departing down the famous pavilion steps to do battle with the mortal enemy, the batsman.
And eventually, of course, in '53, he had a testimonial match at Stafford, in which all the great players of that time went to play that. I think he decided he was going to bowl the first over. So there he was, this tall man who could do anything with a cricket ball. And they invited all the photographers to come on, cineman and stillsmen. And so he kept picking the ball up with Sidney Barnes and just going back and bowling. So Frank Tester said to me, "Hey Kenny," said, "you think he's all right actually? Have they all got what they want in the pictures?" So I said, "Yes, I'm sure they are, Frank." He said, "Because he just bowled a 13-ball over, and I think it's a bit much for a gentleman of his age." So that was the end of it, and the match started properly.
5,000 people at the Stafford Cricket Club. All the top test players played. Jack Aiken, Dennis Compton, Bill Edrich, Reg Perks.
There were about 16 test players, 4 or 5 England captains, and for them to come down and play a testimonial game for me was, in my opinion, one of the greatest compliments that could be paid.
Sidney Barnes strode from the field for the final time. A remarkable cricketer and a remarkable man. He'd given his all to earn a living from the game of cricket for nearly 50 years, but incredibly, he'd also had time to pursue other avenues of generating income.
He worked for almost the whole of his life, doing his copperplate writing.
And he used to catch 2 buses to work after we'd moved. And then he used to have a fair walk, but that's what kept him going.
I obtained employment at the clerks department as a junior clerk, and one of the things that I used to have to do was take documents to have the copperplate writing done. I used to go along these corridors and up a flight of stairs, if I remember, well isolated from the rest of the offices, into this very quiet, peaceful office, and there would be this man sitting there who was very tall and straight and very dignified, but he was very, very unassuming. He was so nice, and it was always one of my favourite jobs to have to take the documents up to him. He'd got cricket memorabilia about, and he used to talk about cricket, but he didn't talk about what he'd done as an England player and that sort of thing. He was very much grassroots cricket.
Barnes worked for Staffordshire County Council until well into his 94th year.
He did not believe in retirement. He says, people don't retire. He says, you keep going. He says, if you have retirement, that finishes you. So if you keep going, that keeps you on the go, and that's it.
Got a very positive mind, hasn't he?
Yes,
and
he had.
I think
was really
this is what helped him along. Very determined, yes.
On Boxing Day 1967, Sidney Francis Barnes died. Tributes from the great writers of the day paid full and suitably glowing compliment to his cricketing ability, but also didn't hide from his self-confessed disdain for opposition batsmen.
Well, very, very friendly. But I wanted to see the back of them.
His ashes were interred in the Sidney Barnes wicket gate at Edgbaston, the ground where he played his first match 72 years earlier, a fitting memorial to this most mercurial and competitive of bowlers.
After the ashes were finally laid to rest, I think the reputation of S.F. Barnes, to a certain extent, was laid to rest, which is quite wrong, but cricket's full of this. It's full of heroes and champions whose reputations are weakened as the years go by the sheer flow of new talent and all the hyperbole that goes with the moderns.
And yet, today, the legend of Sidney Barnes does live on.
To sum Barnes up, I think he would actually sit somewhere near the very, very top. There has been a lot of written about Barnes by people who saw him play, of course, and people who actually have, how can I put it, researched Barnes. And I think it's widely recognised that actually some experts actually will say he was England's greatest ever bowler.
Perhaps history sees him now in a light which people of his day did not see him in. People even today would rank him in the top 10. Even some people would even say he was the best.
I followed cricket 74 years, and he's the best cricketer, not only for Staffordshire, England, I should say the world.
Well, Sidney Barnes is to bowling what Bradman is to batting. He's, without doubt, in most people's mind, especially his contemporaries, the world's greatest bowler.
I think he was the best ever throughout my career and what I've seen since.
Honestly, in my own mind, I believe he's the greatest bowler that I've seen.
Sidney Barnes was the greatest bowler I ever played with.
No bowler could have bowled better than Sidney Barnes. I don't care what part of the world you go to. He was the best bowler I have ever played against, and often I have played on his side.
He really was astonishing. I'd love to have been able to bowl as well as he did.
Sidney Barnes was the greatest bowler of all times, in my opinion, and one of the greatest and most unusual and enigmatic characters that cricket has ever produced.
Well, if I had to sum him up in a sentence, I couldn't have wished for a better grandfather and a better upbringing, because he was the one who brought me up mostly. As I say, he used to take me to school, bring me from school. He used to do his bit of shopping once a week on a Sunday, in fact exactly the same things. I used to go with him. As long as you did your told, that was fine. I couldn't have wished for a better grandfather, and that was it, and I'm proud of him.
I learnt in life what a great man he was in cricketing fields, but at the end of the day, he was grandfather to us and a great man. You couldn't ask for anybody better.
Art, resolution, stamina. He commanded them all. Well might a man who saw him in his prime have found himself saying, "Here was Caesar, when comes such another?"